That morning split my life into before and after. I stood at my father's funeral in a black suit that felt borrowed, breathing shallow, counting seconds. People moved around me offering condolences, but the room felt transactional, like a boardroom wrapped in flowers. My father was gone, yet his presence filled the space because he built something massive, something measured not only in money, but in discipline and legacy. I am his child, raised inside that structure, taught to respect process and patience. His empire took decades, quiet mornings, and relentless focus, and it shaped who I became. As prayers echoed softly, whispers floated too. Not gossip, not memories, but calculations. I noticed my sister-in-law early. She wasn't looking at the casket. She was scanning faces, reading reactions, tracking who stood where. Her eyes moved with purpose, not grief. I told myself I was imagining it. That loss makes you suspicious. $600 million hung in the air like an unspoken headline. No one said the number, but everyone felt it. I felt something tighten in my chest that had nothing to do with sorrow. My hands were steady, my voice polite, my silence practiced. Grief kept me contained, respectful, obedient. I stayed quiet because it felt safer than asking questions in a room full of witnesses. I thought this day was about endings. I thought mourning came before conflict. I was wrong. This wasn't a closing chapter. It was the opening scene of something colder, something calculated, something already in motion before the prayers finished. Greed had taken its seat early, and I hadn't noticed. I learned later how much damage can begin quietly, while everyone believes they are safe, watching flowers, folding programs, and trusting silence before the truth forces its way into daylight suddenly. To understand what happened next, I need to step back and explain who my father truly was, beyond headlines and numbers. He was disciplined, intensely private, and obsessed with structure. Every decision had a reason, every document a place. Growing up, I was taught that systems protect people, and patience reveals truth. He didn't raise me with speeches about power. He raised me with routines, records, and respect for time. That foundation shaped how I saw the world, and it's why I noticed inconsistencies later. My sister-in-law entered our family years before his death. She appeared supportive, warm, and carefully humble. She praised my father's work, asked thoughtful questions, and positioned herself as someone who valued family above all else. On the surface, she fit perfectly. My brother trusted her completely. He believed her intentions were pure, and I chose not to interfere. I told myself that love deserved space, not suspicion. Looking back, that decision still sits heavy with me. The early signs were subtle. Compliments that carried expectation. Curiosity that leaned toward entitlement. Moments where gratitude quietly shifted into assumption. This story isn't about jealousy or personal resentment. It's about patterns that only become visible when pressure arrives. At the time, everything felt stable, even comfortable. Family gatherings were calm, conversations polite, futures implied but never stated. Yet underneath that calm surface, expectations were forming, unspoken and unchecked. I couldn't see them clearly then. I believed time would reveal everything naturally, unaware that intentions, once left unchallenged, gain momentum quietly, shaping outcomes long before anyone realizes a choice has already been made, without permission, without resistance, without consequences. After the funeral came silence, the heavy kind that stretches hours into days. Grief slowed everything. Decisions felt suspended, like the world was waiting for permission to move again. My father had planned for this moment years earlier. His will wasn't immediate. It followed strict legal steps, scheduled readings, and mandatory waiting periods. Structure even in death. During that waiting period, something shifted. My sister-in-law became unusually attentive. She checked in daily, sometimes more. She offered help I hadn't asked for, meals I didn't need, solutions to problems I hadn't voiced. At first, I told myself she was just being supportive. That's what family does. Then came the questions. Not direct ones. Indirect ones, wrapped in concern. How long lawyers usually take. Whether companies struggle during transitions. If timelines could be adjusted. Each question alone sounded harmless. Together, they formed a rhythm that felt rehearsed. Persistent, but never aggressive enough to challenge openly. My brother brushed it off. He said everyone handles stress differently, that she was just trying to feel useful. I nodded, but my body disagreed. Something tightened every time she spoke. I couldn't explain it logically, and that bothered me more than the feeling itself. The first real red flag came quietly. She mentioned numbers casually, not exact figures, just ranges, said out loud as if accidental. Her eyes flicked to faces, measuring reactions. That was the moment grief turned into alertness. I realized this wasn't about mourning anymore. It was about positioning. From that point on, I changed how I moved. I answered less. I reacted slower. I stopped filling silences. I let her speak without interruption. I decided my role wasn't to explain or defend. It was to observe patterns, collect moments, and understand motives before making any move at all. I learned that silence can be a tool, not a weakness, especially when emotions are high and intentions are unclear, and I felt myself stepping back emotionally, choosing patience over reaction, because information reveals itself fastest when no one feels challenged yet. That's when I decided to stop talking and start watching. Her approach changed gradually, almost politely. What began as kindness turned into urgency disguised as concern. Every question was framed around family stability, especially my brother's future. She spoke about protection, about responsibility, about avoiding uncertainty. On its own, each comment sounded reasonable. Together, they formed pressure. She pushed for faster decisions, early access to information, and private conversations with advisors. Nothing direct. Nothing demanding. Just suggestions presented as help. I stayed calm, nodding without committing, offering neutral answers that gave nothing away. Inside, I started documenting everything privately: dates, messages, tone shifts. My father taught me that memory is fragile, but records endure. I noticed how her behavior shifted depending on who was present. In public, she was gentle and cooperative. In private, her voice sharpened, her patience thinned. The pressure wasn't loud or dramatic. It was constant, steady, like background noise you don't notice until it stops. I didn't confront her. I observed her. I let patterns repeat. Then the situation moved beyond our home. Coworkers from my father's company began reaching out, carefully at first. They were confused by mixed signals, unsure who was speaking with authority. Some had received requests that didn't align with existing processes. Others mentioned conversations that felt premature. I reassured them without explaining, telling them to maintain standard procedures. That was the moment I understood the scale. This wasn't about grief or family misunderstandings. It was strategy unfolding in real time. Influence was being tested, boundaries probed, reactions measured. I realized silence was protecting me, while urgency was exposing her. That single misstep changed everything. She sent one message too many, copied the wrong person, and revealed urgency where patience was required. It was small, almost forgettable, but patterns make mistakes visible. I saved it quietly, knowing it would matter later. That was the moment she made a mistake she couldn't take back, and everything began to unravel quietly without witnesses, excuses, or escape from consequences later on. Whispers started where routines once lived. My father's longtime employees noticed inconsistencies almost immediately. Some were told one version of the future, others something completely different. Timelines shifted depending on who asked. Authority felt implied, not assigned. My sister-in-law began positioning herself as an unofficial decision-maker. She spoke confidently about what would happen next, hinting at future control without any legal standing. She never said she was in charge, but she acted like it. That difference mattered. People sense uncertainty faster than dishonesty. Coworkers started approaching me carefully. Their questions were respectful, cautious, almost apologetic. They wanted clarity without choosing sides. Who should they report to? Which processes still applied? Whether previous approvals still mattered? With every question, I felt responsibility settle heavier on my shoulders. I reassured them without revealing anything. I told them to follow existing structures, maintain current procedures, and document everything as usual. Stability became my priority. At the same time, I quietly collected information. Dates, messages, contradictions. I didn't correct her publicly. I didn't challenge her privately. I let consistency do the work. The more she pushed, the more visible her intentions became. Her tone hardened. Her patience shortened. She stopped pretending to wait for formal steps. Requests became demands. Suggestions became expectations. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. At this stage, I wasn't angry. Anger clouds judgment. I was focused. I understood something important then. Exposure wouldn't come from confrontation. It would come from repetition. From patterns no one could ignore once seen. So I stayed calm. I stayed predictable. I stayed quiet. I noticed how quickly people adjusted their behavior around her. Meetings grew tense. Emails became worded. No one trusted verbal promises anymore. That atmosphere told me everything I needed to know. Trust was eroding without my involvement. All I had to do was remain steady, allow the environment to reflect her actions back at her, and resist the urge to interfere prematurely. I let her keep talking, because every word she spoke was building my case. By that point, I had shifted fully into quiet preparation. I began assembling proof without announcing it to anyone. Emails, messages, meeting notes, forwarded requests, and subtle timeline inconsistencies all went into organized folders. My father had prepared redundancies for everything in his life, and I followed his example instinctively. Nothing relied on memory alone. Everything had context. Most nights ended the same way. I sat alone reviewing documents, matching dates, comparing language, and flagging contradictions. One message would reference a conversation that never happened. Another would imply authority that hadn't been granted. Every attempt she made to accelerate the process left a trail behind it. Urgency creates records. Patience exposes them. I didn't confront her. I didn't warn anyone. I didn't signal that I was collecting anything at all. I let the system work exactly as it was designed to. Lawyers followed procedures. Advisors asked clarifying questions. Processes slowed where they were meant to slow. The evidence began showing intent, not emotion, and that distinction mattered legally and professionally. Coworkers unknowingly helped. Some forwarded requests they found unusual. Others asked for confirmation in writing, copying me by habit. None of them were taking sides. They were protecting themselves. Their caution added clarity. Patterns repeated. Language repeated. Pressure repeated. Piece by piece, the picture came together. This wasn't confusion or miscommunication. It wasn't stress or grief. It was premeditated pressure applied early, often, and selectively. Once I saw that clearly, I felt calm. Almost detached. Truth doesn't rush. It accumulates. I understood then that I didn't need to prove anything loudly. I only needed to be patient long enough for the record to speak for itself. Every document added weight. Every inconsistency sharpened the outline. I waited, knowing the moment that mattered most was already scheduled, already protected, already approaching steadily. I reminded myself constantly that restraint was not weakness. It was alignment with how my father built everything that endured. He trusted time, records, and accountability more than emotion. I followed that lesson deliberately, even when impatience tempted me. The quieter I became, the clearer the situation grew. Nothing needed force. Nothing needed drama. The truth was already moving forward on its own, waiting for the moment it would surface naturally. I trusted the process completely, knowing preparation always outlasts panic when consequences finally arrive without noise, shortcuts, or emotional collapse. Then the will reading finally arrived. The room where the will was read was neutral and quiet, designed to remove emotion from consequence. Beige walls, a long table, water glasses untouched. My sister-in-law arrived confident, composed, already rehearsing reactions she expected to perform. She smiled too easily. As the lawyer began, I watched her posture instead of the pages. My father's structure unfolded line by line. Layered trusts. Delayed releases. Oversight committees. Timelines measured in years, not impulses. Control was not immediate. Authority was limited. The assumptions she carried entered the room and quietly collapsed there. There was no outburst. No raised voice. Just visible disbelief she couldn't fully hide. Her shoulders stiffened. Her smile froze, then vanished. I stayed still, hands folded, letting the document speak without commentary. This wasn't my moment. It was my father's. Coworkers were present as witnesses, senior people who understood operations. I saw subtle glances pass between them, small confirmations of tensions they had sensed for weeks. Confusion turned into clarity without a single explanation from me. The structure answered every question they hadn't dared ask aloud. This moment didn't end the conflict. It redirected it. Power shifted without announcement. The rules were no longer flexible, no longer emotional, no longer negotiable. Everything was defined now. Process replaced persuasion. I felt something unexpected then. Not relief. Not triumph. Stability. The kind that comes when uncertainty finally has boundaries. My sister-in-law sat very still, absorbing the limits placed around her expectations. She nodded when required, said nothing unnecessary, and avoided my eyes. I understood then that preparation doesn't humiliate people. It simply reveals where they truly stand when opportunity disappears. The reading concluded quietly. Chairs moved. Papers closed. Life resumed at a slower, more deliberate pace. The air felt heavier, yet clearer, as if uncertainty had finally been boxed, labeled, and shelved, leaving everyone to confront reality without interpretation, shortcuts, or emotional bargaining that once thrived quietly inside ambiguity and expectation for all present. As we stood to leave, I knew the next phase wouldn't be loud. It would be persistent. And she wasn't finished trying to bend them. After the will reading, I changed how I engaged without announcing it. I created distance without confrontation, choosing structure over emotion. All communication moved to written channels. Every decision was redirected through legal and professional frameworks. No arguments. No accusations. Just boundaries. This approach frustrated her more than any open conflict could have. Without emotional access, her influence weakened quickly. There was nothing to push against, nothing to escalate. Co-workers adjusted almost immediately. They seemed relieved to have clarity, relieved to know exactly which processes applied and who held responsibility. Stability returned quietly. I focused on protecting the culture my father built, not on winning anything personally. That distinction mattered to me. I wasn't interested in proving a point or exposing someone publicly. I was interested in continuity, trust, and predictability. Silence became my strongest response. Emails were brief. Meetings were documented. Conversations stayed professional. Every attempt she made to provoke a reaction failed. Questions designed to reopen negotiations were redirected. Emotional appeals were met with procedure. I didn't explain my choices. I didn't justify my distance. I simply maintained it. From the outside, it may have looked like avoidance. It wasn't. I wasn't running away from conflict. I was stepping aside and letting reality catch up without interference. Systems don't argue. They function. Over time, her access narrowed naturally, without resistance, without confrontation, without drama. That calm withdrawal reshaped the environment more effectively than any argument ever could. Influence requires engagement, and once that door closed, momentum shifted away from her completely. It became clear that patience, when paired with boundaries, exposes intentions faster than confrontation ever could, and the absence of resistance forces people to reveal what power they truly lack once pressure replaces opportunity entirely forever. What followed was the consequence she never planned for. The narrative around her didn't change overnight. It shifted slowly, quietly, the way trust usually does when it's no longer reinforced. Co-workers stopped acting on her requests without confirmation. Advisors began keeping their distance, replying later, asking more questions, copying more people. Nothing was announced. Nothing was explained. Her credibility eroded without a single public accusation. That was the most revealing part. Patterns, once seen, couldn't be unseen. People talk quietly, especially in environments built on trust and precision. Not gossip, just caution. Small warnings disguised as advice. Suggestions framed as concern. The same way influence spreads, doubt does too. She wasn't punished dramatically. There was no confrontation, no removal, no public fallout. She was excluded gradually. Meetings she once attended no longer included her. Conversations ended earlier. Decisions moved forward without her input. Doors didn't slam. They simply stopped opening. I watched this happen from a distance, not interfering, not correcting, not amplifying. This wasn't revenge. It was gravity. Actions returning to their source without force. I felt no satisfaction watching it unfold. Only clarity. The system was functioning exactly as designed. My father always said systems don't need emotions to function. They only need time. Trust compounds slowly. So does doubt. Once credibility fractures, it doesn't collapse loudly. It thins. It fades. People become careful. Then distant. Then unavailable. I noticed the shift in her behavior too. Confidence gave way to frustration. Requests became sharper. Messages shorter. She sensed the change before she could name it. Influence feels invisible until it's gone. Through all of this, I stayed consistent. I didn't celebrate. I didn't comment. I maintained the same boundaries, the same tone, the same procedures. That consistency made the contrast unavoidable. Others could see it clearly now. Eventually, there were no misunderstandings left to hide behind. No ambiguity to exploit. The environment itself reflected her actions back to her, stripped of emotion, stripped of narrative, leaving only consequence. That's when I knew the quiet phase was ending. Because once reputation shifts, confrontation becomes inevitable. And that moment was coming closer than she realized, carrying questions she could no longer redirect, and answers she could no longer control. Then came the moment she finally confronted me. The final conversation was brief, measured, and almost eerily calm. She approached with confidence that had survived subtle erosion, demanding explanations as if clarity alone could restore control. I listened first, letting her speak, noting the way she framed questions without ever admitting responsibility directly. I responded with facts, timelines, and silence where she expected emotion. Dates, emails, requests, patterns. Nothing opinion-based, nothing embellished. Every pause was intentional. Every word weighed against previous behavior. Control disappears when it is no longer fed, and I didn't feed it. There was nothing to argue about, no narrative to contest. The structure was set long before this conversation began. I didn't accuse her. I didn't defend myself. I simply stood where the truth had always lived, letting consistency and documented history do the work. My brother finally saw, for the first time, what I had been protecting him from. He nodded quietly, absorbing lessons learned from months of patience and observation. This wasn't a victory scene. There was no celebration, no dramatic reveal. It was an ending. The kind of ending that doesn't need noise, because the system, the records, and time themselves speak louder than confrontation ever could. As she walked away, I realized that the final lesson wasn't about her, or money, or influence. It was about patience, observation, and restraint, the things that truly protect people when chaos threatens to spill over. The real insight came after the doors closed and silence returned. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was the kind of clarity that stays with you forever. But the real lesson came after she walked away. Looking back, I realized this experience taught me more about human nature than I ever expected. Money didn't change people. It revealed them. It exposes impatience, entitlement, and hidden intentions faster than grief or love ever could. Survival doesn't always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it looks like patience, quiet observation, and restraint. It looks like creating boundaries without conflict, letting structure and process do the work while emotion runs out of steam. This is how I honored my father, not by clinging to his wealth, but by continuing his values, discipline, integrity, and respect for systems. Proof beats panic. Boundaries outlast manipulation. Greed overplays its hand because it cannot wait. Impatience is self-revealing. And silence, when paired with consistency, becomes its own form of protection. I've learned to watch, document, and wait, trusting that truth eventually surfaces on its own. I ask you to reflect. When pressure rises, when someone tries to manipulate or accelerate your decisions, when trust and patience are tested, where can silence serve you better than confrontation? Where can preparation protect you more than reaction? The question is, when pressure rises, will you react, or will you prepare?